All right, thank you. I would like to welcome everybody to our interview here with Mike Foote, who is, well, Mike, tell you what, why don't you just tell us a little about yourself?
All right. Thanks a lot, Scott. I appreciate it. My name is Mike Foote. Currently, I'm a state representative for Eastern Boulder County. I've been doing that for the last 6 years. And in addition to that, I've worked at the Boulder District Attorney's office for the last 14 years as a deputy district attorney. Before that, I was a Midwesterner and moved out here to go to the law school at the University of Colorado, and have been in love with Boulder County ever since. This is a great place to live, great place to work, and I just am really thankful that I'm here.
All right, so talk a little bit about that, Barry. So where did you go to school and family?
Right. Well, I went to undergraduate school, if that's what you're asking, in Indiana. That's where I grew up.
Okay.
And I was looking at law schools, and this was in the mid-'90s, so it was a little bit of time ago at this point in time. But I was looking at law schools all around the country, and one of the law schools I wanted to look at was the University of Colorado. It's a very good law school, and I wanted to look at it amongst others. So I've got kind of an interesting story about that. I came out to look at the University of Colorado. It had been the first time that I'd actually been out here to Colorado. Regretfully, I wish I could have come out much sooner than I did. But I came out to the law school. At the time, it was the old Fleming building. For anyone that's familiar with the CU campus, you know, it's the Fleming Law Building. It was a one-story building with kind of a danky basement with lockers in it. Not anywhere close to the kind of facility that law students had come to expect at that point in time, especially on other campuses, these big kind of palatial buildings. And you walk into the building and you're in awe of the building. It's designed to be that way. And people kind of greet you and they treat you like a VIP. You're just this person applying to their school, but they treat you like a VIP. So I had visited 4 or 5 schools before coming out here. Of course, the setting at the CU campus is amazing. I mean, it just blew me away when I first came over 36 and saw the Flatirons there in Boulder and saw Chautauqua. It just blew me away. But then I went over and visited the Fleming building, which didn't blow me away. It was just this really small building, and I walked in and I said, "Hey, I'm here for the tour," and they said, "Well, okay, you can look around if you want. I mean, that's up to you." And so it was a completely different experience than what I was used to. But anyway, I looked around for a little while. I decided at that point in time I was not very impressed with the CU Law School. And so I left and just had thought, well, I'm not going to school here. So but I have some extra time, so I'll go up to U-Bikes on Pearl and rent a bike and ride it around. And I rode it around Boulder and loved the bike paths. I'm a big cyclist, and that's one of the things I try to do in my spare time. And then I rode it up to the top of Flagstaff and took a look around.
Mm-hmm.
And at that moment I said, yeah, I'm coming to school here. It was an amazing revelation. And fortunately I got into CU Law School. And at that point I knew that Boulder County was just something special. And I've strived to be here and work here since then.
All right, fantastic. So what makes you want to be the DA versus, for instance, going into private practice, kind of like your recent boss did? So this is a
Right.
big difference in what you could be doing, particularly in Boulder.
Well, I've never been in private practice, first of all. I've always been attracted to doing public service. And after I graduated from CU Law School, well, I'll back up a little bit. While I was in CU Law School, I actually did, after my first summer, I was a law clerk at a private firm. And so that was after my first year. And frankly, I hate to kind of admit this, but at one point in time, I actually fell asleep while I was supposed to be doing work because it was just not that exciting to me. Of course, it's not surprising they didn't ask me back to be a law clerk there after that summer, but I knew it wasn't really for me doing that kind of work, really. And my second year of law school, I interned at the Denver DA's office, and then I also, when I was able to practice under the Student Practice Act my third year of law school, I worked at the Thornton City Attorney's office doing municipal prosecutions, and also the Boulder County Attorney's office. And so I always wanted to be in court, and I always wanted to be a public servant, and prosecuting cases and being in a district attorney's office just really appealed to me, even in law school. And after law school, I got a job actually at the Durango District Attorney's office for about a year and a half and lived down there, which was great, but came back up here quickly when a job opened up in the Boulder office and I got it. And I've just always wanted to be a prosecutor. And in 2012, I had an opportunity to run for this state representative seat out of Eastern Boulder County, which has been a great opportunity. I've really enjoyed it. I've learned a lot. Being the district attorney to me in Boulder County is kind of a capstone type of position. It's something that really appeals to my sense of public service as well as just being here in Boulder County. I mean, I've really made it my career to be part of Boulder County, to be working here, to be protecting it, and being the district attorney in Boulder County would just be, like I said, it would be a real capstone to what I've done.
So talk a little bit about your thoughts on Mike Doherty getting the DA position over you. I know you both kind of applied. And,
Right.
if you don't really want to answer that a whole lot, I can understand, but talk a little about that. How'd that make you feel?
Well, there was the vacancy process, and the governor ended up making a different decision. That's his prerogative to do. But also, I always knew that it would be a bit of an uphill battle with the governor. Since I've been down there, we've butted heads on a few things. Oil and gas being one, the US 36 privatization being another. And I've always wanted, and I always have, stood up for what's best for Boulder County, but that sometimes doesn't put me in good standing with others and that represent different areas of the state. So I understand that, and so I kind of went into it knowing that there was going to be a bit of a challenge there. The governor ended up making his decision, but we have an election this year, and ultimately it is up to the Boulder voters to make a decision about who's going to fill out the rest of the term. And I think that's appropriate. I think that the voters should make the decision. It's fine that the governor has the ability to do an interim appointment. I mean, that's in the law. The governor does an interim appointment, and then the Boulder County voters make a decision. So I've been straightforward from the beginning that I would be standing for election. I would be putting myself before the Boulder voters, regardless of what happened with the appointment, because I announced I was going to run before the appointment was even made. And that's on the theory that the Boulder voters really are going to have the final say, and it was likely to be a competitive race, as really it should be. There should be choices before the voter, and the voter ends up making a decision who the next district attorney is going to be.
So Mike Doherty's your boss now.
Right.
So how does that work with you running against him but working for him?
Well, it's not as weird right now as you may think, because I'm on unpaid leave from the office right now since the legislative session is going on. Mm-hmm. And that's the arrangement that I've had over the last 6 sessions now. During legislative session, we made the arrangement where I would just be on unpaid leave. So I would be out from January until the session was over. And just focusing on legislative session, I mean, not checking emails, not checking messages, not doing cases, nothing, just gone. And that was designed for a couple of reasons. One was that there should be some kind of a wall there while legislative session is going on. And second, because during the session, it's impossible to do, well, not impossible, but very difficult to do anything else. You have to be very focused on the bills and the committees that you're on and the work that you have to do anyway. So right now, I'm actually not working in the Boulder DA's office. I'm down doing the session down in Denver. So like I said, it's a little bizarre. It's a little weird, but on the other hand, not quite as weird as it could be if I was actually physically there.
Yeah. So talk about being a prosecutor. What are some of you feel are your proudest moments, your biggest accomplishments, things you really are glad you were able to do?
I'm really proud of a number of cases that I've done that have been very difficult cases. And this has also been, I know you didn't ask this and I won't talk about this too much, but this has been an approach I've taken to bills down at the legislature too, where I really like to dig into a problem and just focus on trying to solve it, really trying to thread the needle on things. And certainly there have been a number of cases that have come across my desk, just like any prosecutor's desk, that have presented real issues. I mean, there may be proof problems. There may be witness problems, which of course are proof problems, and just other factors that make the case very difficult to prove. And I've really taken pride in being able to take those cases and make them into good cases that can be presented to a jury, and then the jury ultimately makes the decision about whether or not we've proven the case beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, certainly there's cases that I have not done that to, because after all the work that I've done and the analysis, in my mind, it's not a provable case. And of course, if it's not a provable case, you're not allowed to go forward ethically as a prosecutor. And so there have been tough cases that have come across my desk that I've said, no, I'm not going to prosecute. But there have been tough cases that have come across my desk that I have taken a look at and decided, okay, we're going to go forward. We're going to do more investigation. We may take it through a grand jury process. Ultimately, the jury will make a decision. And being able to do that on some difficult cases, some meaningful cases, and getting convictions on the vast majority of those cases, I think, has been a real highlight of my career at the Boulder DA's office.
So let's expand that a little bit. You're as a Boulder DA, you would be responsible for upholding the law. Right now,
Right.
You're creating the law.
Right.
You're a lawmaker. How do those two things work together? Can you do both?
Well, no. I mean, you can't be elected DA and elected representative at the same time.
So they are.
Yeah, they're exclusive that way. I mean, right now I'm not an elected DA. I'm a deputy district attorney, so that works out. Incidentally, it wouldn't work out if I was working for the federal government. So it's the state government, and state government seems to work. But if the elected DA position, of course, that's a full-time job and then some. So that's all that one would be able to do as the elected DA. But you bring up an interesting point. Well, maybe you didn't mean to bring it up this way, but I'll take it this way, which is that my experience down in the legislature, I think, will very much inform how I work as a district attorney here in Boulder County. Because when you're a deputy district attorney or assistant district attorney, you have a view of the office. You know typically how things work in that jurisdiction. You probably know how things work in some other jurisdictions as well, because you've gone around and you've gone to trainings or you've trained others, which I've done, of course, on things. But being at the state legislature really helps to see how the system could work and how it works in other states or even around the state, and some of the policy decisions that the criminal justice system practitioners can make. And that perspective I did not have before going down the legislature. I felt like that I did what I could to learn about other jurisdictions, but when you have just your cases in front of you, you don't quite see necessarily some of the decisions that you're making and the wider ramifications that they have with policy. And the state legislature has certainly helped me see that and see how our system can work even better, how we can make changes to make our system work better, and how Boulder County really is in a position to be a leader, if not the leader, in Colorado and the country, and making our system work better. We have a very good constituency here that's understanding that there needs to be some reforms and the reforms that make the system work better. We have really smart and good people that want to be part of the Boulder DA's office that can help implement those types of things. And having gone through the last 6 years being a policymaker, particularly when it comes to criminal justice, I think will really help me be even more effective getting to that end goal of making sure that Boulder is the statewide and a national leader and making sure our system works well.
So talk a little bit about, let's take the state representative position. Mm-hmm. What kind of things have you done there that you're particularly proud of, that you think have had a great effect?
Well, again, I think it's taking those problems and really threading the needle and coming up with solutions. I've been able to pass a number of bills that approach it from a different direction, and also getting your votes. I mean, you have to get your 33 in the House and your 18 in the Senate and your one governor to sign off on an idea. You may think you have the best idea in the world, but you've got to get all these other people to think so too. One example I'll give you is a bill that I passed in my first session when I was at the Capitol, and it relates to Longmont. So that's why I'll bring it up as an example. You may remember in 2012 there was a car accident. It was a driving under the influence case where the expected mother was coming back from her last well baby check. She was 8.5 months pregnant, and it was the middle of the day, and I think it was around 9th and Pace. a drunk driver ran the red light and hit her and caused her to miscarry. So she lost her baby at 8.5 months, and there was nothing in the law that actually accounted for a criminal offense for that. So the only thing that the driver could be prosecuted for was vehicular assault and DUI and things like that, but nothing that really accounted for the miscarriage. And I remember reading about that and thinking that there's got to be a way that we can do this. I mean, the community was understandably concerned at the very least that there wasn't any way to really address this in the criminal law. As it turns out, there had been attempts to do that at the Capitol the previous 10 years or so. There had been bills that had been run, but they always got caught up in abortion politics, pro-choice versus anti-choice and so forth, and trying to figure out how there could be something in the criminal code that could account for this kind of tragedy, but not affecting women's reproductive rights. And that turned out to be a very difficult issue for the previous people that ran the bills, and they just couldn't quite get there. When I showed up in 2013, I had this idea because this had happened in Longmont, so I thought there's got to be a different way that we can address this. And in fact, we ended up building upon what had been tried before, but took a little bit different of an angle and came up with the Crimes Against Pregnant Women Act. And it put into place new law violations called unlawful termination of pregnancy. And they accounted for, depending on the mental state, I mean, it could be anything as high as intentional misconduct to negligence, like careless driving or drunk driving. And it layered the criminal penalties based upon that if the woman happened to lose her pregnancy as a result of it. So we actually put into place a good law. It wasn't perfect in my opinion, but it certainly did account for those kinds of tragedies. And as it turns out, just a couple of years later, again, in another case you may remember, it was a terrible case here in Longmont, where a woman had her unborn child cut out of her womb. And that law, amongst others, was used in order to prosecute the perpetrator. And seeing that kind of go around full circle was very satisfying because, first, no one had really been able to figure out how to thread the needle before. Second, I was able to pass this law. And third, it was used in a constructive way to help address, to the extent we can in the criminal justice system, this tragedy that occurred later on. And so that's really the model that I've been trying to use. I try to find problems and try to find solutions that people haven't tried before. And sometimes it's worked and sometimes it hasn't quite worked. I mean, particularly with oil and gas, there's been a lot of different approaches I've tried and the oil and gas industry is opposed and they haven't worked. But I still want to continue trying to do those things, and I think it was good to do what we've done.
All right. So let's shift topics a little bit. So forfeiture laws, civil, criminal. As you know, there's a lot of controversy around those right now. So
Right.
What are your thoughts on forfeiture?
Well, there have been a number of bills, and there was a bill that was run last year that I supported that actually put civil forfeiture laws back into more control under Colorado law. So there are some that are more controlled under federal law, which is more, what's the word I'm looking for? It's looser. It's more forgiving. It has looser standards than Colorado law. And that was a pretty controversial bill, actually, that was run. Like I said, I supported it. I think it was a good idea. And I think civil forfeiture can be useful when you're taking away the fruits of the criminal activity. So if you have somebody that steals a bunch of money from an elderly couple and then ends up buying a house or a car as a result of that money that was stolen, they shouldn't be entitled to that as a result of their criminal activity. But where you get into trouble is when that money that's coming in is funding ongoing operations from the police department. And the police departments will tell you, and I think they're being truthful, that they're not going out and trying to arrest people just because they want to make this money. But the public perception is there. And part of the success or lack thereof of a criminal justice system is having good public perception that your prosecutors, your police officers, and other actors are above board. They're not doing something for profit. And so I think that's where I have drawn the line in some of the bills that I've supported, which is that we really shouldn't be using the money for ongoing operations to the extent we can avoid it. But also, we want to make sure that criminals that have obtained property in an unlawful way don't get a chance to keep it either.
Mm-hmm. So you actually answered the second half. How do you feel about using this to fund public safety? So,
right.
All right. So do you think, here's an interesting question I'd like to ask this one of guys like you. Do you think a college education is important for law enforcement professionals to obtain? And I'm talking about sheriffs, police officers, and things like that. And in what fields or circumstances would you recommend pursuing an advanced degree for guys like this?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about a 4-year undergraduate degree, I don't think it hurts. I think actually most departments here, if not all, actually require that, a 4-year degree. But I'm not 100% positive of that, but I think that's the case, at least the ones in Longmont and Boulder. And maybe this goes to a little bit of a wider question, which is what good is a 4-year degree? And certainly now the legislature, we've debated this a lot. It's valuable. I mean, no doubt. I've got a 4-year degree. I'm glad that I have it. But is it necessary for the trades? Is it necessary for a vocation? Is it necessary to have a good career in other areas to get a 4-year degree? And the example I like to use that I talk about all the time is my dad owns a car repair shop back in Indiana. He's owned it since 1984. He's got 5 mechanics that work for him. None of those mechanics have a 4-year degree. And they don't need it because they need to know how to fix a car. So they go and get their vocational training in something that they want to do. I can't fix a car. I got a 4-year degree and I don't even know how to fix a car. There's no way I could fix a car. So making a 4-year degree as mandatory for something, I'm not quite sure if that's really, that has to be mandatory. But of course the chiefs and the sheriff can determine that themselves. Now, if there's other ways that you can get the kind of training that you need, then I wouldn't be opposed necessarily to having something like that. I think that when it comes to law enforcement, particularly police officers and sheriff deputies that are on the street, their utility comes in their experience, their bedside manner. I mean, their judgment. And the good ones are the ones that are able to navigate very difficult situations. I mean, at night at 1 o'clock in the morning, people are not happy to see them generally. They're in difficult situations. They have to make snap decisions. And they have to do it in a way that upholds everybody's constitutional rights and also not fall for the bait. I mean, if someone's spitting at them, to not respond. I mean, all these things are not easy in human nature. I'm not sure I could necessarily do it. So the training that they receive and what makes someone a good police officer isn't necessarily going to a college and getting a 4-year degree in English or history or whatever. It's all the other things, the intangibles there. So I guess to maybe answer your question in a very short way after a long rambling answer is that I don't think that it hurts, but I'm not so sure that it has to be 100% required either.
Yeah. So how do you see law enforcement in the U.S. changing over the next 5 years? What do you think will be the change drivers that really make that happen?
Well, I think that we see what's happening now, which is that law enforcement has to respond, and I kind of touched on this a little bit before. They're not just the cop that goes and makes arrests, and that's not. And I'm not saying that's exclusively what it was before, but they have to be able to navigate very complicated situations with mental health, with threats, with, I mean, all kinds of things that are very difficult to get through and be able to make quick decisions and be able to make them right. And so they have to have a lot of training, a lot of experience in how to diffuse a mental health situation or how to try to get someone that has a substance abuse issue into treatment rather than just arresting them. And Longmont, of course, has a program that they're firing up right now that does that very thing. So law enforcement officers have to do a lot more, I think, than they had to do before. And they have to do it without making mistakes because they're under the microscope, and that's appropriate. They have a very difficult responsibility, and what we ask them to do is difficult. And I think they're up to the challenge. I mean, here in Boulder County, we have some really good law enforcement agencies. They're trained very well. They are able to do all of these things. And it's a progressive leadership that we have in many of our departments. So they get it, but that doesn't make it any less difficult. And I think over the course of time, we're just going to see more and more of that, where the police officer is much more of a utility player rather than someone that goes out and makes arrests. In fact, part of what I want to make sure we do as district attorney is we make less arrests if we can avoid it. We don't put people through the court system. We put them through treatment instead. So they're completely diverted from the contact on the street from the officer to a treatment facility rather than through the court system. And that's going to take even more skill and knowledge from the police officer on the street.
All right. So what are your thoughts about the legalization of cannabis?
Well, it's been a very interesting experiment.
You're kind of at the forefront of all this.
Yeah, and you know, we at least I kind of find it a funny joke to joke about how down at the legislature, some of the things we're doing now would have put us under indictment 5 or 6 years ago, and that's true. I mean, we're doing things with, and it still is a violation, of course, of the federal law. So theoretically, and putting aside legislative immunity and these types of things, the feds could come in and try to make trouble for us, but. It's been very, very interesting, and I see how it's been a very successful experiment in many ways. But we're going to be tweaking it for decades. I mean, we still run bills now dealing with the liquor code. So we're going to be running bills, or the legislature is going to be running bills 30 years from now tweaking the marijuana laws. But we've set up a system, I think, that's very good, although there's still a gray market, there's still a black market, and there's still loopholes that have to be closed, but it's going to be a gradual process and a lot of trial and error. But for the most part, particularly with the operators, dispensary owners, and so forth, they follow a very extensive set of rules, and they do it to the best of their ability. And I think that we have a system that is working, but not without any issues, of course. But that's what we can expect. I mean, we were one of the first really to try to set up a system like this, certainly under the recreational code. But all the issues that we've gone through and the bills that I voted on and had to think through, I would have never expected when I first got elected. I mean, I got elected the same year that Amendment 64 passed, so I had no idea what we were in store for. But I think it's been a good model. Certainly going through it amongst the first means that other states can learn from our mistakes. But overall, I think it's been a successful model.
All right. So you touched a little bit on the shift, the federal point of view, and there's been a big shift from this administration to the previous administration around cannabis. How do you think that's going to affect us, and how would you deal with that?
Well, certainly I've signed on to letters and other correspondence to the federal government saying that they should just leave us alone and let us do our own thing. And that has received bipartisan support. We have our Republican Colorado senator and our Democratic Colorado senator that have been telling the federal government just to leave us alone and let us do what our voters asked us to do. So I couldn't predict what the feds are going to do. I wouldn't really be in the business of that, but I think it would be a huge mistake for them to come in and shut us down at this point. I just think that, and I don't know what that would get them other than trying to make some kind of a point. But our industry now, the marijuana industry now is, I mean, for just coming on 5 years, 6 years, I guess at this point, has matured quickly and turned into a real legitimate industry like any others. And an industry that helps the state, that employs a lot of Coloradans, and to come in and shut it down would be absurd. So I could never pretend to know what Trump is thinking, but I gotta believe that his people are at least telling him, or at least most of them are telling him, don't go there.
So Longmont has got a large Latino population. So what's your position on DACA?
Oh yeah, very supportive of DACA. I'm very supportive of our immigrant community, and hoping that they are able to resolve the DACA situation at the congressional level. I mean, some of the folks that I've met that are on the DACA program are some of the most impressive people that I've ever met. I mean, they're good students, they're good employees, and they're doing it under very uncertain circumstances. I mean, I always took it for granted that I could go to a college, I could get a job, and I would just go about working hard, and hopefully things would work out. But the people that are DACA, they don't have that kind of certainty, and for them to still continue to be very devoted to our community, devoted to their families, and devoted to working hard says a lot about their character. And I just hope that it gets resolved at the federal level in a satisfactory way. It's on the one hand, it's really hard to believe that they haven't been able to figure it out, but that's taking the politics out of it. Of course, politics are all over it, and it's really a shame because these kids that are on the DACA program are just fantastic people, and they really contribute to our community, particularly Longmont, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. So this is related to it, but not exactly the same. What's your position on dealing with the federal ICE authorities?
Yeah, we've dealt with that at the legislative level as well on some bills that have been run by Republicans, and I voted against those bills. They're the so-called anti-sanctuary city bills, mm-hmm. where they aim to penalize state lawmakers or city council members that implement quote-unquote sanctuary city type of policies. And I think what they lump into that would be, I guess, non-cooperation with ICE. And the proponents of those types of bills want there to be mandatory cooperation with the federal authorities. And I've voted against those types of initiatives consistently because the local law enforcement should not be seen as an arm of the federal government. Because if that's the case, then your undocumented immigrants that are victims of crime are never going to come forward. They're just going to be afraid, and they are already, but it makes it even worse if they think that we're just going to turn them over to ICE for coming over to us and reporting a crime. And we see that perpetrators come into the community and they really oftentimes target those that are undocumented because they know that dynamic is there, that they'd be afraid to come forward as victims. And so we want to make sure that they realize that local authorities, the Longmont Police Department, for example, the Boulder County Sheriff's, the DA's office here in Boulder, we're not ICE. We're not the federal authorities. We're designed to protect the entire community, whether you're documented or not. And so if we start acting cozy with ICE, then they're not going to see a difference between us. Now, of course, if ICE comes in with a valid arrest warrant, then of course local law enforcement needs to cooperate with them. But the problem is they don't. They come in with what they call a detainer or a 247G or whatever the form is lately, and they say, we just want you to detain this person for an extra 48 hours so we can come pick them up. But it's not a legal warrant. It hasn't been signed by a judge. And it's been found to be illegal here in Colorado in several different spots. But and Boulder County Sheriff has wisely declined to honor those types of detainers. And of course, I would be on that side as well. It seems as though ICE feels like they can come in with this piece of paper from their agency saying detain somebody without really having much of a legal basis for doing so. And if that continues to be the case, then there's no reason for us to obey that. Like I said, if they come in and they do their job right and they have an arrest warrant, then of course it has to be honored. But they just have not been doing that at all. It goes back to the bigger picture, though, which is that we are not ICE. We are local law enforcement, and we're here to protect the entire community. We're not here to deport you or to enforce immigration laws.
All right. So tell me a little bit about your position on our current gun laws.
Well, I was there in 2013, my first year of the legislature, when we went through a big fight on gun laws. We put into place a number of good gun safety bills, but man, we took a lot of resistance, and Democrats paid the price, one can argue, for that, particularly in the state Senate. But it was all worth it because I think they were really good bills that we put into place. The background checks bill that closed loopholes in private sales and private transfers is a good law. And the magazine limitation, again, I think is a good law. We also ended up passing a bill that required those going through the background checks and wanting to purchase a gun to actually pay for the background check so it didn't come out of education or transportation funding. And we also passed a law that made it so that domestic violence offenders, or those that are accused of domestic violence, have to forfeit their weapons during the course of the case. Because we know that some of the most dangerous times in a relationship is right after a domestic violence incident has been reported and after the perpetrator gets arrested. And so we put those into place in 2013. The gun lobby opposed all of them. They opposed them all, and they opposed them all with everything that they possibly had. And it was crazy down at the Capitol, seeing all the people that turned out thinking that we were actually going to try to take away guns, and it was going to lead to Armageddon, and that no one was going to be able to purchase a gun, no one was going to be able to transfer a gun. All these things that were said in 2013 that turned out not to be true. Yet we still had to battle through that. Since then, it's been mainly playing defense because, as I mentioned, the state Senate has changed hands since then to being Republican controlled. And we haven't been able to pass anything meaningful in the gun safety area, but we have played some good defense against efforts to roll back the gains that we made in 2013 with the background checks and everything else. And I've been on the committee and lately been the chair of the committee that has killed all of those bills that has attempted to roll back those gun safety reforms, and I've been happy to do it. I think I voted against efforts to roll back the magazine limitation probably 10 times at this point in time. I mean, everyone should know what my position is now when we see those bills. And I think that they were a good start. If things look better next year as far as the balance of power in the Senate, then perhaps more progress can be made. But until then, it's just a stalemate.
So should all or even some teachers be armed?
I don't think so. And the vast majority of teachers that have contacted me when we've heard these bills have been against it. And in fact, I would say the vast majority of just people, not just teachers that have contacted me, have been against it. And we have these hearings in our committee, and people from both persuasions can come down and try to persuade the members of the committee about their position. And the presentation and the turnout by those that are against that concept is much, much better than those that are for the concept. I just don't buy the premise that more guns means more safety. And that's the fundamental premise we hear from the gun lobby and gun advocates, that the good guy with the gun type of thing, or that more guns means a safer area. But if that were the case, I just think that we would be the safest country in the world because we have so many guns already. Yet we're not the safest country in the world. And then if you look at say, war zones like Afghanistan or the Middle East, they have a lot of access to guns there, but they're not very safe. And so I just don't buy the fundamental premise of it. I understand, though, that there are people that are very passionate about the idea, and they seem to believe it would help, but they haven't persuaded most people. I don't think. That's not my sense, at least.
So what about concealed carry permits? What do you feel about those and the process of getting them?
I think it's good now. There have been efforts to get rid of it. Again, these are bills that I voted against, efforts to get rid of it. I mean, you have to go through some amount of training. It's not much. And you have to apply. And the local sheriff will either say yes or no based on criminal record and other information that they have. Ironically, El Paso County, which is one of the most conservative areas of the state, of course, the sheriff there has denied more permits than anywhere else. Of course, they have a lot more population than Boulder County, but it just goes to show that there's some people that just should not have a concealed carry permit. The system that we have seems to be working fine, and any attempts to roll it back, I've opposed. I suppose you could put in more requirements, more training requirements, for example, or maybe a more extensive background check. I wouldn't be opposed to something like that, but I don't know if anyone has shown a need for it at this point in time. Certainly the bills that have been run have not gone that way. The bills that have been run have tried to scale it back, in fact, make it so that there's no permitting process, which, again, when you consider the types of and amounts of people that have come out to testify in our hearings, it's pretty clear that most people think that would be a bad idea.
So a question we actually get fairly often is, do you think Longmont needs a SWAT team?
Yeah.
This also applies to Boulder, Louisville.
Right. Yes. I mean, there are instances, and you have to remember, I was saying this a little bit earlier, officers have a very difficult job. By the time we see these defendants in court, they're typically sober, they're not as angry anymore. It's not like 1 o'clock in the morning when it's all going down. And so we see a very different side of people in court than officers see on the scene. And so we always have to be concerned about officer safety. I think that's a huge concern. And to the extent that SWAT teams are used to help officer safety, I think that's a good idea. Now, I think you can point to instances perhaps that where it's been used where it shouldn't be used. And that may be the case. I don't know if I would disagree with that contention. Again, that comes down to the discretion, I think, of the local police chief or the sergeant or whoever the commander is of the SWAT team. And you might be able to scale it back a little bit. I mean, if you're going up and knocking on a door and there's no sign that there's going to be any kind of problem, do you need to take a SWAT team in? I don't know. That's not my specialty. I leave that to the local police force. But I do know there's instances where they're appropriately used, and we have to worry about officer safety. And really that has to be a huge concern going forward when local agencies and others are deciding how best to use a SWAT team.
This is kind of an extension on that, but there's been a lot of controversy about the militarization of our police forces.
Right.
How do you feel about that?
Yeah. Well,
it's rare not to see a policeman with a body armor.
Yeah, that's right.
It's pretty common now.
Yeah, I think that's legitimate because, I mean, again, I'm going to put the officer safety part aside because, like I said, that's a paramount concern, I think. But when you have an officer that looks almost like RoboCop, I think that's really hard for the community members to really relate to that person. And really, the officer nowadays has to be a very community savvy, friendly officer with good bedside manner, I think, in order to be effective. So if you have officers rolling down the street in a military type of vehicle, I mean, that's intimidating and not necessarily welcoming at all. So again, there might be times when it's necessary, and that's, of course, up to the local chief and those that are executing it. But to the extent that you can avoid it, I would say that's probably better, because at the end of the day, really, if the community trusts the police force is going to be able to do its job a lot better. If it doesn't trust the police force, then that shows in so many different ways, including at the district attorney level, where you have juries that may not necessarily believe a police officer when they testify, when you have juries that may be skeptical of law enforcement, juries that don't trust law enforcement. So it all comes back to the district attorney's realm, but it all starts at the community level and making sure that you can relate to the community. And I think the same thing goes for DAs as well, prosecutors. I mean, I think you have to be out in the community. You have to be able to be trusted by the community. People have to know that you're a stand-up person, you're a person of your word, and that you're just a good community member. And that translates over to the courtroom, and I think to juries, listening to the evidence and making sure that it's the evidence that controls and not some bad situation in the past that may affect their judgment.
So what's your position on the death penalty?
I'm against the death penalty. I wouldn't use it as the Boulder DA. And even if that weren't the case, I don't see a situation where the death penalty could be used here in Boulder County. I mean, there's just virtually no chance that you could impanel a jury that would unanimously come to a death penalty verdict. But practically speaking, and that's really the plane that I analyze this, the death penalty in Boulder County would be foolish to try. It takes a lot of resources, first of all. We have 30 attorneys in the office. You have 4 attorneys that are working full-time on a death penalty case, or 3, whatever you put towards it. Those are 3 or 4 attorneys that you can't use on other cases. And it's not like we've got an excess of attorneys right now. I mean, we've got 2,500 felony cases per year now, and many of them require a lot of attention. A death penalty case is just on a plane above and beyond that, where it just takes all of your attention and dedicated resources. So, and then there's the aspect that really bothers me, which is it turns the defendant in kind of a celebrity type of defendant, someone that is it just takes them to another level of name recognition, which I don't think that's what we want. I think what we want to do is we want to convict the defendant and get them life without parole, and they're gone. and they're out of people's memories. And I look at it from that perspective. There are plenty of reasons why you can argue the death penalty isn't appropriate, from a moral plane to a practical plane and everything in between. And so the bottom line for me is, district attorney, I just wouldn't use it.
All right. So this is a political position you're going after. Do you have any higher political aspirations?
No. As I said before, I mean, the district attorney job is a capstone type of position for me. It would be an amazing opportunity to be the DA. And the district attorney is a political position, although not like as a state legislator. I mean, we're elected, of course, and the DA should be elected. The DA should be elected because they should be accountable to the community, and they should have incentive to go out and listen to the community. And so I like that part of it. But it's also different than a state legislator, because you're not down at the Capitol staking out political positions, trying to gather votes, running for re-election depending on some of the positions that you have. As the DA, of course you stand for election, and you should, but the DA is likely to make decisions that will displease pretty much everybody, depending on the decision. I mean, you're going to displease people if you don't prosecute something under certain circumstances. You're going to displease people if you do prosecute cases under certain circumstances. The evidence always has to be your guide, not whether or not this particular group is going to be upset or this particular group is going to be upset. And that does play a role when you're a state legislator or in other political positions. You try to gather coalitions. You try not to upset certain coalitions. That's how you put together your votes. But as the DA, that's not something you should be concerned about. As the DA, you have to be concerned about what's the right thing to do in this particular case. What does the evidence show? And as a result, take a police shooting, for example. There could be a police shooting where the DA decides that that person should not be prosecuted. The police officer should not be prosecuted based on the evidence. Well, that's not going to be popular. Or on the other hand, if the DA decides the police officer should be prosecuted, that's not going to be popular with some people. So you have to be prepared to accept that, and you have to be prepared to make the decision and then stand by it. And of course, take community feedback and be willing to stand up to the community and explain it and understand if they don't agree with it. But it's different than trying to put together your coalitions and trying to make sure that this group is always happy with your decisions or that group's always happy with your decisions. It's a different kind of political, I guess is what I'm saying. Right. Not your typical type of political, and that's how it should remain.
So this whole conversation has been kind of about how you would be as the DA. Why don't you, just to sum it all up, to finish up this interview, why should you be the Boulder County District Attorney?
Well, I love Boulder County. I mean, I'm passionate about Boulder County. I've worked here for the last 14 years as a deputy DA. I've been a state representative for the last 6 years. My career has been about Boulder County and protecting Boulder County. And like I said at the beginning, I've been taken with Boulder County ever since I first got here. I love it here. It's my passion. And doing the right thing for Boulder County, you can look back at my career as a deputy DA, you can look back at my career as a legislator, and what's always guided my decision is what's the right thing to do for Boulder County. On oil and gas, for example, I've taken heat from the industry, of course, from my Republican colleagues, even from some folks in my own party, and the governor, for what I've done with oil and gas, or what I've tried to do with oil and gas. But I've done it because it's the right thing to do for Boulder County. And there's been times that I guess paid the price for that politically. But the right thing to do for Boulder County is to try to push those things forward with oil and gas and other topics too. I don't want to just focus on that one, but as DA, that will always be my guide. What is the right thing to do for Boulder County? And I feel like that I'm ready to do it. I have been doing it.
All right. Well, sir, thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it. And Longmont, this is Mike Foote, and he is running for Boulder District Attorney in November. And is there any way that people can get a hold of you if they have questions? Do you have an email? Or
of course I do.
Our website?
My website is easy. It's just my name. It's mikefoote.org. And the email is electmikefoot@gmail.com. And you can always call my cell number, which is 303-519-2183. Always available.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir, again. And thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.